Today we get to play in one of Arena's most exciting but punishing events, a Limited Championship Qualifier draft. This event has a 2-draft structure. If you get 7 wins in the first draft before your second loss, you get a token to draft 2. In draft number 2, you have to get 5 or 6 wins before your second loss. And then you get a nice cash prize and an entry to an online tournament that feeds into the in-person Magic Limited Championship. This is an enormously punishing structure, so today I'm going to try to give you the data edge that you will need to maybe have a chance in an event like this. And the reason that I say it that way is the first thing I want to talk about is how much this event structure is really, really tough. With the understanding of just how unlikely it is to get to the end of an event like this, let's talk about what are the best and worst archetypes right now in Secrets of Strixhaven. The format has matured, and we have a really good handle on what works and what doesn't. So I'm going to show you not just win rates, but also win rates compared to play rates so that we can talk about which archetypes you are most likely to be overdrafting or underdrafting. Finally, if I could give one message to the community grounded in data right now, it would be something I'm calling the Converge Chasm. At the moment, I honestly believe that Arena is saturated with not very good Converge decks. I want to tell you why I believe that and what you can do to avoid that trap. All right, so why do I say that this event sucks? What I've done here is very simply modeled each game as a coin flip. Suppose that you walk into the event with a 50-50 chance of winning any game. The reddish-orangish mass is the number of people who have been eliminated after a certain game in the event. Blue are the people who are remaining, and that tiny, tiny, tiny little bar at the top that pops up after game 7, those are the people who have been qualified. And this is just draft 1 out of 2. So after game 1, even if you lost, you're not yet out. But after game 2, after 2 50-50 coin flips, a quarter of the field will have been eliminated. After game 3, fully half of the field will have been eliminated. And by the end of the maximum possible games, 8 games, 96.5% of these 50-50 gamers will have been eliminated. Only 3.5% of people with a 50-50 win rate will manage to qualify for the second draft. Not qualify for the Arena Limited Championship, qualify for the second draft and a chance to go for the Arena Limited Championship. If you are a fantastic drafter, someone who has not just a 60% win rate in random generic arena queues, but someone who has a 60% win rate in a tough event like this, you still have only about a 10 or 11% chance of qualifying at that 60% win rate. So to expect to qualify, you have to be really, really, really strong in a tough field and also do about 10 buy-ins. 10 buy-ins is 50,000 gems or about $250 US. That's the price for someone with a 60% chance of winning in this event to have an expected number of qualifications of 1 qualification for the day 2 draft. Now remember, even if you qualify for the day 2 draft, you basically have to do this same thing over again. This time you only need 5 wins instead of 7. So at that point, it's about 1/3 of that 10% of these people who win 60% of their games will actually qualify for the Arena Limited Champs. So about 3% of the people who have a 60% win rate, so about 3% of really good drafters would qualify for the Arena Limited Championships through this type of tournament. When I was looking up information about the event structure, I saw this really nice write-up on the LRcast subreddit of someone who did a lot more math than this. And I really strongly agree with their conclusion. Number 2 in their bullet point, don't grind this event. This is not really a grindable event. Arena Direct, some people do manage a win rate where they can just keep buying in and buying in and buying in, and they kind of net make money over the course of the weekend. That would be extremely, extremely difficult with this event. One thing that this person points out is that this type of event does seem to have record-based matchmaking, which means that maintaining a 60% win rate throughout the event is totally implausible because you're playing against other decks that are, 6 wins, 1 loss by the end of draft 1. So it's not just having a 60% win rate against the field, you need to have a 60% win rate against people who are doing as well as you, which would be really fluky. Speaking of this 10% chance number for a really good drafter, I do remember after the last event like this was posted, LSV put up a bunch of draft 1 videos. He was not qualifying, and then he basically said, I'm going to go off camera. This is just from memory. So apologies if I get any of the details wrong, but he basically said, I'm just going to go off camera and I'm just going to draft until I qualify. I think on LR, he later said it took him about 10 runs to qualify. So that's about what you would expect from a great drafter. And then he loads into draft 2. I think he got completely cut off of his lane in draft 2, kind of inexplicably. And then he, I think, got mana screwed and flamed out in 2 games. So all that to say, I'm definitely going to be participating in this event, but even more than with the Arena Directs, I'm going to have a strict budget with myself. The way I look at Arena Directs is basically, it's like buying a movie ticket where there's a chance of winning a raffle. Here, it's like buying a movie ticket and the chance of winning a raffle is really, really, really small. So how many movie tickets do I want to buy this weekend? Probably like 2 or 3 is where I'm at. I would just say agree with yourself how many you're going to do in advance and do not expect the result that you're going to get to draft 2 just by being a strong drafter. All right, now that we've talked a lot about the event structure, I do want to dig into Secrets of Strixhaven data. So what's working and what's not working in this set? First, let's get an overall picture of what's winning in the whole history of the format. So if you look at all of the games played up until today. So the first thing I want to show you is as simple as can be. If you go to 17lands.com, thank you 17lands.com, go to their deck color data section and look at Secrets of Strixhaven for the whole range of the format so far. You might see a bit of a surprise in how the colleges have performed over the course of the whole format. So I think it's widely believed, and correctly so, that Orzhov and Boros, these 2 white, probably more aggressively oriented colleges, are the top of the pack. At least in best of 1 queues online, these are the best places to be. Simic is somewhere in the middle. This does not include the super splashy, convergy, many color type of Simic, but it does include Simic with a little splash, and it's kind of in the middle of the pack, but a ways below the white-based colleges. But then there's a surprise here at the bottom. I think it has been conventional wisdom that Witherbloom is the worst performing college. But in fact, Prismari has managed to sneak 0.1 percentage points below it in win rate over the course of the whole format so far. I want to show you a little mini movie about how things have evolved in the format. So what I did was I took a 3-day moving average of the individual days color pair win rates. So this is just a slightly smoothed version of what was the most winning college on a given day. I've also added a little dotted line that you can see at the bottom there underneath all of the other colleges. That represents the average of win rates among 3+ color decks. The idea is that that doesn't exactly represent like what a Converge deck looks like in terms of its win rate, because it could also be a total mess of a deck that has nothing to do with Converge and someone just drafted 3 colors because their draft went terribly. But I would say a good Converge deck, you could take the 3+ colors and the Prismari and the Quandrix curves, which, to be clear, Quandrix is the one that looks at green and blue. Prismari is the one that looks at blue and red. Then Orzhov, or Silverquill, is the white-black one. Lorehold is the red and white one. And Witherbloom is down here, green and black. And then the dotted line is the 3+ color one. So to find what a good Converge deck looks like, maybe you would take the 3+ colors and kind of average it together with the Prismari and Quandrix bases that a deck like that might have, and then maybe boost it up a little bit. And maybe you would think it would be a good Converge deck would be like a little bit higher than these ones individually. Regardless, basically the shape of the format is 2 clumps emerged in the first few weeks. So there was the white-based aggro, then there were the other 3 colleges, then 3+ colors was solidly below that. Then you have this interesting moment here where it does look like maybe the green-based colleges are achieving some separation. This was right about when I recorded my last video on this topic, but it really didn't happen. They all went back into their little grouping. And even with the 3-day moving average, there is some noise, there is some bouncing around. There was this really weird kind of collapse around May 24 when everyone on 17 lands got worse in correlation and then got better. I don't know if there was maybe an Arena Direct that weekend that took a lot of good players out of the pool. But broadly, I would say the 2 groupings have mostly held up with a few subtleties. So first off, I would definitely rather right now be Silverquill than Lorehold. It looks like, so there was, I think, an early format agreement that Lorehold was the best, especially after it was just leading the way early on. So it was the best college for the first, let's say, week of the format. But then ever since then, Silverquill has actually been performing better. And even now, in that simple average that we saw over the span of the whole format, Silverquill is 0.3 percentage points more winning than Lorehold on average. Clearly, ever since that first week of the format, people have been a little bit more high on Lorehold than they should be, probably compared to Silverquill. I also want to point out within the other grouping, the trifecta of Prismari, Quandrix, and Witherbloom, I would say that Quandrix has a pretty clear lead on the other two if you look at it over the long term. So whenever one college separates itself out from that pack and achieves a gap, it's pretty much always Quandrix, basically every single time. I mean, here's a little bit 3 days when Witherbloom was on top in the moving average. But look, Quandrix is out on top, Quandrix is out on top, Quandrix is out on top. So basically every time there is a college that achieves separation from this group of three, it's Quandrix. So I would rather be straight up Quandrix or Quandrix with a little splash than straight up Witherbloom or straight up Prismari right now. And I do think Prismari and Witherbloom are like equally low. Neither one of them is obviously worse than the other in my view. They're very, very close. Finally, Converge is probably, it's one of the most popular things to be doing in the format, as we'll see in the play rate data. But look, Converge is a subset of this 3+ color line. We can argue and we can haggle about how much of a subset it is. And maybe you think you should add 7 percentage points to the win rate of the 3+ color pairs to get at the win rate of a good Converge deck specifically. But look, you have to make up a big gap to make a 3+ color deck as good as anything in that secondary grouping, and especially as good as the better white base aggro. You could say a good Converge deck is 7 percentage points better than the 3+ color decks were at their lowest. It still would be only about as good as a normal Silver Quill deck. So here's the power ranking of the format on the face of it, just from average win rate data. We'll complicate this a little bit when we look at play rates. But on the face ranking is you want to be in one of the white aggressive decks. You could argue about whether Lorehold is actually aggressive or whatever, but it's probably more aggressive than your average Converge deck. Then I would want to be in straight out Quandrix, but there's a big gap here. And then it's Prismari or Witherbloom or Converge, if we're talking just the average version of any one of these archetypes. I think this is a pretty different story from the conventional wisdom, which kind of elides how good straight up Quandrix, or just that straight up Quandrix has achieved a bit of a separation above the other colleges, and tends to put Converge, which I view as an average Converge deck, pretty clearly being in a number 3, like bottom tier position, puts Converge as like a beater of the format on par with the white aggro. I've heard a lot of positioning that this is about amazing white aggro decks against amazing Converge decks, and that's like the head-to-head of the format. I think it's actually a lot deeper than that. And in particular, I think that probably gives Converge a little bit too much credit, at least in the best of one world. If we're talking a best of 3 draft at a high skilled pod, that could be a very different story. But where these best of 1 data apply, I think this is the power ranking. By the way, if you have questions about what these data are and how they're generated and how to interpret them, I'm going to link a video in the description that I did, which just talks about how we use 17 lands data to get better at drafting. All right, but to actually have an edge against the field, you need to know what people are most inclined to be drafting. By looking at play rate data, how many times these different colleges are actually played, and comparing it to win rate data, we can identify which colleges are overdrafted and which ones are underdrafted. That will tell you how to adjust what you are doing right now to be better positioned against the field. While we get into that, let me say that if you like this kind of effortful data deep dive content that gives you an edge in draft and sealed, do make sure that you are subscribed to my channel on YouTube. I love doing these kinds of videos. I do one every week at least. And then I show you how I apply these data lessons in my bread and butter daily Monday to Friday draft gameplay videos. One type of video though that is especially fun is this kind of analysis video where I analyze your drafts and your sealed games and give you feedback on them. I'm currently just a few dozen subscribers away from hitting 2,000 subscribers. If you subscribe between now and when I hit 2,000, I will include you in my next draft feedback video. So just subscribe to the channel and comment below saying that you subscribed before I hit 2K. Drop a 17 lands link to a draft or sealed event, and I'll include you in my next feedback video after I hit 2,000 subs. All right, now let's see what is being played in the format. So here is play rate data from 17 lands from the beginning of the format to today. It tells a very clear story. So the 2 white aggressive archetypes do continue to be out on top, right? Not quite at the very top though, which is extremely interesting. So I would say people are playing the white aggressive decks basically appropriately, although I will note, I think that Lorehold should be a little bit below Silverquill because Silverquill is winning a little bit more than Lorehold. So if you're pairing white with something, you should lean a little bit more likely to pair it with black than to pair it with red, compared to how likely you are at present. However, in the play rate data, there's a grouping of 3 on top and a grouping of 2 on the bottom. In the win rate data, there was a grouping of 2 on top and a grouping of 3 on the bottom. What's the odd one out? It's Prismari. Prismari, weirdly, is among the most played grouping, but it is among the least winning archetypes on the win rate data. So it is crystal clear that Prismari is being way overdrafted. It wins about as much as the green-based archetypes, and yet it is played as much as the white-based archetypes. Then way on the bottom are the 2 green-based archetypes. My story about this is very simple. I think that people think that once they're in green, they have very easy off-ramps to converge. So if I'm in green and I see an Arcane Omens fly by late or some other really good converge payoff, I'm going to take that, or be way more likely to take that as a reason to leave Quandrix and start playing a 3-color plus converge deck. So I kind of get sorted out of the Quandrix or Witherbloom category and into the converge category. And we do see that in the play rate of the 3+ color category. This one is way out on top. The average draft round arena, or let's just say the modal, if I have to guess what you're drafting knowing nothing else about you, the best guess would be that you're drafting 3 or more colors in your deck. So people are loving the converge stuff, right? I don't know that this would be true of other formats. I think maybe only ones where people are really liking a big multicolor build around. Again, I do want to be straight up that yes, sometimes this 3+ color category includes like train wreck drafts where someone starts out, white, black, and then ends up getting shipped only green, blue, and then they have to like cobble together some 3+ color thing out of that. But that should not be super common, that people who are using 17 lanes actively are train wrecking that card that hard that they're forced into playing an extra color. That's a pretty extreme train wreck situation for a draft. So I would say the balance of the evidence is that people are way too likely to play Converge right now or try to go for a many color strategy. And they would do a lot better if they would just stick to the basics of the green-based archetypes at least. Looking back at our Premier Draft color deck win rate data over the course of the whole format, this is kind of an eye-popping result. Prismari is drafted almost 200,000 times with a 54% win rate. Simic is drafted about 100,000 times with a higher win rate, half the number of drafts and a higher win rate. So this is not a claim about the inherent strength of these archetypes. If Quandrix were drafted 200,000 times, surely it would collapse to a much lower win rate. It's a claim about how you should position yourself to do well against the field right now this weekend. All right, so what's overdrafted? Number 1, Prismari. I'm sad to say because I love Prismari. It is way overdrafted right now. Number 2, the Converge decks. We can haggle about by how much. You could say it has a much higher win rate and a much lower play rate than I'm giving it credit for. Even if you say that, it's still at least a little bit overdrafted. And finally, I think people have it in their head that Lorehold is really where you want to be. Silverquill is like a second best option. It's the other way around, at least given how much people are drafting them right now. In a vacuum, when nobody knew what was good, it did seem that Lorehold was the place to be in the first 3 days of the format. But once that conventional wisdom hardened that Lorehold is like the best, then Silverquill actually became a better place to be. Slightly better. So make yourself slightly more likely to go black when you have white than to go red than you have white, compared to how likely you are right now. Okay, what is underdrafted? Just Quandrix. I would take this to be ignore that late Arcane Omens, or take it, but don't necessarily make it your whole game plan. Speculate on it, and if you get shipped another Arcane Omens, a Snarl Song, a Sundering Titan, and then a Together as one, that's a pretty high bar, but still, you get shipped a bunch of Converge payoffs. I'm not saying never play Converge. That deck can be very strong. But the bad Converge decks seem to be really bad, and people are getting into them a lot. So and they seem to be specifically, I'm guessing, I haven't seen direct evidence of this, but I'm guessing they seem to be specifically likely to hop over to Converge if they start out green. Maybe just be a lot less likely to do that. If you're in green-blue, you might want to look for reasons to stay green-blue rather than for reasons to become Converge, okay? And then finally, I would say Silverquill is still a little bit underdrafted, not just underdrafted versus Lorehold, but also, and we could actually say the same thing about Lorehold. It's funny, Lorehold is kind of overdrafted compared to Silverquill, but underdrafted compared to the field. Let me put it this way. An interesting thought experiment is that if we ran out the tape on a draft set infinitely long and everyone had infinite brain power and was infinitely informed, you would think that the color pair win rates would converge to 50%, right? Or they would each be equal, right? Because it's like I don't want to cut myself thinking through this out of the video because it's actually complicated, and I invite you to think through it with me. But basically, the idea is, if I know that Lorehold is more likely to win than Witherbloom, then shouldn't I be fighting hard enough to be Lorehold that I fight until it's no longer advantageous for me to do so, right? So I think when you have something like Silverquill that is popping out of the data like this, I mean, this is it's a reasonably balanced format. It's not egregiously unbalanced, but it's like noticeably above the rest, especially above like the 3+ color decks. By being a 3+ color deck compared to Silverquill, you're starting out at a 5 percentage point disadvantage, which I think is not that different from like mulliganing to 6. Maybe it's like half the penalty of that or something. So like, shouldn't you be substantially more likely to play Silverquill than you, the modal 17 lanes drafter are, right? Maybe we should all be fighting a little bit harder to get into white, is what I'm saying. Like, Silverquill is way more winning than Prismari and even more winning than Lorehold right now. It is less drafted than the 3+ color decks. It is comparably drafted to Lorehold and Prismari, which it's better than. So Silverquill is definitely being underappreciated. All right, so what exactly is going on with Converge? I want to talk about something I'm calling the Converge Chasm. Okay, so in their card win rate data, 17 Lanes has something really, really cool. So they have this game in hand win rate number that I've talked about a lot. This is, given that you draw this card, what is the probability that you go on to win the game? So if I could draw any one card in the set, it would be Together as One, the rare, awesome, Converge payoff that draws a bunch of cards, deals a bunch of damage, gains a bunch of life, right? That's the best card to draw in the whole set. But then they also have this really interesting stat called games not seen win rate. So Together as One is all well and good if I draw it in my hand. But by the fact that I saw Together as One during the draft, picked it, made a bunch of picks after that, built a deck around that, and then I am playing that deck, all of those are decisions that are partly shaped by the fact that I had it Together as One, right? I mean, the extreme version of this would be I pack one, pick one Together as One, and then I spend the whole draft trying to build a Converge deck to house my Together as One. So the idea of games not seen win rate is maybe in some way the card is like it's ending up in decks that might be worse because of its presence, or maybe better because of its presence. Games not seen win rate is what percent of the time did I win a game when I did not draw this card? A gap between game in hand win rate and games not seen win rate could suggest that the card is making the deck better or worse. Together, and in the Together as One example, it could be I pack one, pick one Together as One. I go Converge when I really shouldn't have. Together as One is good enough that just by drawing it in a multicolored deck, I'm going to win a lot of the time. But if I don't draw it, I craft a deck that kind of sucks because there weren't other good payoffs at my seat. Other people around me were Converge. I went in that direction belligerently anyways. I did not get paid off for it. My deck overall kind of sucks. And when Together as One doesn't show up to rescue me, I end up losing a lot of the time. And in the Together as One example, it's very, very real. Together as One, when you draw it, you go on to win almost 2/3 of those games. When you don't draw it, you go on to lose more than half of those games. A huge gap between its win rate when you draw it and when you don't. So then 17 Lands provides this improvement in hand metric, which is about the difference between the games not seen win rate and the game in hand win rate, okay? If we sort cards in the format by improvement in hand, number one is Together as One. A flashy Converge payoff that's an extremely powerful card, but probably incentivizes building a highly overdrafted deck. It's very common when you sort by improvement in hand for the top cards to be just like mythic bombs that people want to take and they want to play even if they shouldn't. That kind of makes sense. Not everyone is just trying to win at all costs all the time on Arena. I'm not trying to shame anyone for taking an Emeritus of Ideation and trying to play it if it's one of your 5 drafts of the set and that's going to be fun for you. That makes perfect sense to me. So to get rid of that, like just having fun mythic factor, I want to sort by uncommons and commons and sort by improvement in hand from top to bottom. And let's see what the cards are. Number one, biggest improvement in hand. So we're saying this is a measure that has something to do with this card ends up in bad decks, but it rescues those bad decks by being super powerful on its own. Okay, that's basically what we're saying. So Snarl Song is the #1 rescuer of bad decks, or you could say cause of people building bad decks. We don't know which way it goes, but you could speculate. So Snarl Song, when it shows up in your hand, 62% of the games are going to be a victory. When it doesn't show up in your hand, about 51% of the games are going to be a victory. Environmental Scientist, it's not a Converge payoff, it's a Converge enabler. But even this one, when it shows up in your hand, 61% win rate. When it doesn't show up, 52% win rate. And I'm guessing you really want to see it early as well. Arcane Omens, another Converge payoff. Stock Up, an individually extremely powerful card, frankly a bomb. But this goes in another deck. Well, it could go in the Converge deck, but it also goes in Prismari, which is another deck that we said is way overdrafted right now. Stress Streams, another Prismari card. Saner, another Prismari card. Vibrant Outburst, a Prismari card. Sundering Archaic, a Converge payoff. Divergent Equation, a Prismari card. Transcendent Archaic, a Converge payoff. We had to go down, I believe, 11 to find Paradox Surveyor, which is a blue-green card. Probably this is not because the Simic decks that it's ending up in really depend on it. Probably it's because it's going in Converge decks that have fragile mana bases. And when they draw it, they are way more likely to win than when they don't draw it and get mana screwed. Brush Off, a Prismari card. Proctor's Gaze, probably being used for mana fixing in Converge decks, right? Then finally we get Quandrix Charm, which is probably a straight up Quandrix card, like way more than a dozen down the list. The point is, I'm calling this the Converge Chasm because the idea is if you have a Converge deck, you need to not just have a Snarl Song in your deck, you need to be drawing it. You need to not just have it together as one in your deck, you need to be drawing it. That means that among these top cards, I'm not even sure Sundering Archaic counts as a super top card for Converge, but let's say it does. Among like Transcendent Archaic, Sundering Archaic, Environmental Scientist, Arcane Omen, Snarl Song together as one, these kinds of cards, you need enough of a density of them that you are going to be drawing several of those to bump your win rate up into the 60s. Because remember, we saw a 60% win rate means you have a 10% chance of qualifying for draft 2 and about a 2.5% chance of actually making money and qualifying for the next big event. So I just want to really push the community. If you get into Converge, make sure that you really have the density of payoffs that motivates us to be Converge. You need to have a good reason to play Converge, and I would actually say you need to have a lot of good reasons to play Converge. All right, so with that said, really good luck in the event tomorrow or today, everyone. But remember, don't try to grind this thing. Don't just assume that you're going to win. Have a budget, stick to it, buy your movie tickets, but don't expect to win the raffle. And with that said, I think this is going to be my last deep dive on Secrets of Strixhaven. We actually have a new set coming out week after next, which I cannot believe. So next week's Data Deep Dive, I'm going to try to hit some more general topics. I'm kicking around some ideas like how to splash in general and exactly how lucky do you have to get in sealed to win? Is sealed deck just a lottery? Or how do you build a good sealed deck as different from how do you build a good draft deck? I'm just circling these kinds of ideas. So if any of those jump out at you, make sure to let me know which one sounds the coolest. And of course, if you're not subscribed and you want to catch those, make sure to subscribe to the channel. All right, good luck in the event if you play it. And until tomorrow, have tons of fun playing Magic and don't be afraid to splash.